What if I told you, some spirits never left their graves, and tonight, they might be watching you? If you love ghost stories, hit subscribe, tap like, and share this video so we can bring you even more terrifying tales. Subscribe, like, share to keep the ghosts coming. The story begins not with a scream, but with silence. A silence so deep, it seemed to seep from the hollow eyes of the doll itself. In the mountain village of Takayama, where the air was always crisp and carried the scent of pine resin and wood, the people had lived with traditions so old that even the priests no longer remembered their origins. Among these traditions was the presence of the Daruma doll, round, red, hollow, and smiling. To the villagers, the Daruma was a symbol of resilience, a vessel for their wishes. But beneath the painted surface, beneath the lacquered red shell, there lingered another understanding, one not spoken aloud. They believed that the Daruma could watch, they believed it could listen, and, in the rarest and darkest of circumstances, they believed it could hold something else entirely. It was the autumn of 1874, when the first whispers began. The year had been difficult. Storms had ravaged the rice fields. A fire had destroyed 3 homes, and sickness had spread among the children. In the temple, the monks burned offerings and prayed, but their chants could not erase the heavy air that hung over the village. That was when the merchant Ishikawa Hirataro, a man with keen eyes and a restless spirit, arrived with something unusual. He had traveled to Gunma, where Daruma dolls were crafted by artisans whose skills went back centuries. But the doll Hirataro brought back was unlike any the villagers had seen. It was larger, its red hue darker, almost the color of dried blood. Its face, instead of a gentle smile, bore a grim expression that seemed carved rather than painted, and, most unsettling of all, its single painted eye gleamed as if wet, as if it were truly alive. Hirataro boasted that this was no ordinary Daruma. It was blessed, he said, by a monk who had spent his life in isolation, meditating in silence until his final breath was drawn before the altar. He claimed the spirit of persistence itself dwelled within the doll, that it would bring prosperity not only to his household, but to the entire village. The villagers bowed politely, but when they left his shop, they whispered behind their sleeves. There was something wrong with that Daruma, they said. Something in its stare lingered too long. That night, Hirataro placed the doll in a position of honor on a wooden shelf in his shop. He lit incense before it, bowed 3 times, and prayed for wealth. When he blew out the lantern, the shop sank into darkness. Only the Daruma remained, its single painted pupil glinting faintly in the moonlight. And from that moment, the silence began to change. The village of Takayama was one of those places where time seemed to drift, slower than in the rest of the world. The mountains hemmed it in on all sides, their forests dense and ancient, their rivers rushing with a voice that seemed older than language itself. The villagers had long believed that spirits dwelled in the natural world, the kami of trees, the restless souls of those who had drowned in rivers, the shadows of ancestors that sometimes wandered too far from the graves where they were meant to rest. To live in Takayama was to accept that the visible world was only half the truth. Behind the veil of ordinary sight, another world existed, a world of whispers, of drifting forms, of hollow eyes that stared through paper walls. Children were taught never to whistle at night, lest they invite wandering spirits. Farmers left offerings of rice, wine, and salt at the edges of their fields, in hopes of appeasing unseen presences. And in every household, the hearth fire was treated as sacred, a barrier between the warmth of the living and the cold hunger of the dead. The Daruma doll, in this world of beliefs, was more than a toy or talisman. It was a threshold object, a container for intent. To paint an eye was to give it a soul. To leave it half blind was to leave it hungry, and to abandon it altogether was to risk leaving a door open that should have remained closed. The priests of the village temple, Shirinin, knew these truths well. Each winter, they gathered the old Daruma dolls that villagers brought to them, stacking them high in wooden pyres. They chanted sutras as the fire consumed them, releasing the energy of the unfulfilled wishes. The smoke rose into the sky like a procession of tiny souls, dissolving into the night. But the doll in Hirataro's possession would never burn so easily. In the first weeks, strange fortune did indeed come to him. His shop, which had been modest, suddenly drew customers from neighboring towns. Merchants traveling along the mountain passes claimed they felt compelled to stop there, though they could not explain why. Coins clinked merrily in Hirataro's strongbox, and his family began to enjoy comforts they had never known. Yet, for all the prosperity, unease grew. Hirataro's wife, Aiko, told her sister that at night she sometimes heard whispering from the shop floor. She would wake to the sound of her husband's voice, only to find him asleep beside her. When she crept to the doorway, the whispering would fall silent, and the Daruma's painted eye would gleam faintly in the dark. Their daughter, little Hannah, began to cry whenever she was left alone in the shop. "The monk is watching," she said in a trembling voice. Her parents scolded her, insisting that the Daruma was a protector, but Hannah insisted, "He is not smiling." And indeed, when neighbors looked at the doll, they no longer saw the promise of luck. They saw a gaze that weighed heavily on the heart. The painted smile seemed less like joy and more like the strained grimace of someone holding back a scream. The village elder, Matsuo, warned her. He told him that some Daruma were not to be trusted, that when the spirit inside was not pure, the doll became a prison. "If you do not release it," Matsuo said gravely, "it will demand something from you." But Hirataro laughed. Wealth had clouded his caution. What spirit would complain of riches? He said, "Let it demand. I have much to give." That night, when the lanterns were snuffed and the moonlight traced its pale fingers through the paper screens, the Daruma's unpainted eye seemed to darken, as though something was forming in the void. A pupil, invisible to the human hand, but painted from the other side. The silence that followed was not the silence of peace, but the silence before a storm. The villagers began to dream. Not one, not two, but dozens of them awoke with pounding hearts, sweating in the chill of the night. Their dreams filled with visions of a round figure rolling slowly toward them. Its face was obscured, its robe red as blood, and when it drew close enough, they saw its single staring eye. Some said the monk from the doll appeared in their homes at night, sitting in the corner, unmoving, staring. Others claimed they heard the sound of wood scraping across the tatami mats, though no furniture had shifted. The priest of Shorin Temple was summoned. He examined the Daruma and frowned. "This is no ordinary doll," he murmured. "Its spirit is not content." He advised Hirataro to bring it to the temple for ritual burning at once. But Hirataro, drunk on his newfound wealth, refused. "Why destroy what brings prosperity?" he snapped. The priest could only bow and leave, though in his eyes lingered deep worry. And so the Daruma remained in the shop, its gaze unyielding, its hollow body no longer empty. It was on the 21st night, beneath a crescent moon, that the silence finally broke. Aiko awoke to the sound of scratching. At first, she thought it was a rat, but the sound was not from the walls, it came from within the Daruma itself. She sat up, her breath frozen in her throat, and listened. The scratching grew louder, like fingernails dragging against the inner walls of the hollow doll. She shook her husband awake. Together, they crept to the shop. The Daruma sat on its shelf, perfectly still, its painted smile unmoving, but the sound continued, echoing inside the wooden shell. And then, in the flicker of lantern light, they both saw it. For just an instant, the blank white circle of the Daruma's unpainted eye shimmered, though a pupil had been painted there in black. But neither of them had touched a brush. This was only the beginning. The ghost in the Daruma had awakened. The scratching never truly stopped, even when it fell silent, even when the room seemed still. Hirataro's family carried the echo in their ears, as if the sound had burrowed into their bones. The Daruma doll remained on its shelf, unmoving, but the silence around it grew heavy, like a room filled with unsaid words. The merchant tried to laugh it away. He told his wife that rats sometimes found their way into hollow things, nesting where no one expected. But no rat could explain the feeling of being watched, nor the strange shifting of shadows on the walls, nor the fact that his daughter Hannah refused to enter the shop anymore. "She sits at the foot of my bed," Hannah whispered one night, her small body trembling in her mother's arms. "The monk, he wears red, like the doll. He doesn't blink, he just looks at me, and when I close my eyes, I hear him breathing." Aiko wanted to take the child and run, but Hirataro silenced her with sharp words. His wealth was growing, his business was booming. "Surely," he said, a little unease was worth the price of prosperity. But the truth was gnawing at him too. He felt it at night when he lay awake, eyes straining in the dark, sensing a figure standing just beyond the doorway. He felt it when he counted his coins, only to see, for a moment, that the glint of gold looked like 100 staring eyes. And most of all, he felt it when he looked at the Daruma itself. The unpainted eye no longer seemed blank. It shimmered faintly, as though the emptiness had depth. as though something behind the surface was staring out. The priest returned, summoned by Aiko in desperation. He brought with him salt, paper talismans, and the quiet authority of someone who had seen the world tilt into shadows before. This doll was not born for luck, he said after long minutes of silent observation. It was born as a vessel. What do you mean, a vessel? Hirotaro demanded. The priest traced his fingers over the doll's smooth surface. There are spirits that do not find rest. Some are caught between worlds, unable to move forward. Others are bound deliberately, trapped by ritual. The Daruma hollow faceless, waiting for Isis, a perfect cage. Whoever gave you this doll did not bless it. They bound something into it. Hirotaro scoffed, but unease flickered across his features. Even if it were true, the spirit has brought me fortune. I will not part with it. The priest looked at him gravely. Fortune from a ghost is like fire stolen from the pyre. It warms at first, but it always burns. But Hirotaro, blinded by greed, refused. The priest left, his sutras unsaid, his salt unscattered, his eyes filled with pity. That night, the dreams came again. This time, not just to Hana or to the neighbors, but to Hirotaro himself. He dreamed of a cave cold, damp, its stone walls streaked with moss. A figure sat in silence before the rock wall, legs crossed, back hunched. His robes were the same crimson as the Daruma, though torn and ragged. His face was pale, waxen, and only one eye stared out. The other socket was a hollow void, black as ink. The figure turned toward him, and Hirotaro felt the weight of that single eye bore into his skull. "Paint it," the monk whispered, his voice like the rustle of dry leaves. "Complete me." Hirotaro woke with a strangled cry, sweat slicking his skin. But when he looked toward the shelf, he swore the Daruma's blank eye was no longer entirely white. There was a shadow in it, a faint, inky shadow forming a pupil. Days turned to weeks, and the haunting grew bolder. Customers began to complain of cold drafts in the shop, though no wind stirred. Some claimed to hear muttering behind the shelves. One woman screamed when she thought she saw a man crouched in the corner, only to find nothing there when she looked again at night. The family heard the unmistakable sound of something rolling slowly across the floor. Thud, stop, thud, stop. Always halting, always patient, always closer. Hana grew pale and thin, refusing food. "He wants me," she whispered one evening, her eyes wide with terror. "He says I have two eyes, and he only has one. He wants mine." Aiko wept, begging her husband to burn the doll. But Hirotaro's pride was iron. "This is a test," he said. "The Daruma tests perseverance. I will endure." But in the hollow of his chest, doubt was already blooming like mold. It was Matsuo, the elder, who finally confronted him. The old man arrived at the shop at dusk, his walking stick tapping against the stones. He looked at the Daruma for a long while, his mouth tightening into a grim line. "I knew such things when I was young," he said quietly. There were whispers of monks who trapped wandering spirits inside vessels, sometimes bowls, sometimes statues, sometimes dolls. They said it was mercy, to give the restless a form. But mercy, when twisted, becomes prison. The spirits do not thank their jailers, they hunger, they demand. Hirotaro's jaw clenched. "And what does this one demand?" Matsuo's gaze was steady. "Completion. You gave it one eye, you bound it halfway. Now it waits. If you paint the second, it may be freed, or it may no longer need to ask." That night, Hirotaro sat before the Daruma with a brush in hand. His fingers trembled. He dipped the brush into the ink, lifted it toward the blank eye. But just as the bristles touched the surface, he heard a breath, a deep, slow exhalation, coming from within the hollow doll. His courage failed. He dropped the brush, ink splattering the tatami. The Daruma sat unchanged, its unpainted eyes staring with infinite patience. The haunting escalated. Objects moved on their own. Lanterns swayed without wind. Chopsticks clattered across the floor. Coins spilled from their boxes. The air grew heavy with the scent of incense, though none had been lit. Aiko swore she saw a figure moving through the house at night, robes dragging across the floor, though no footsteps sounded. And Hana began to change. Her laughter vanished. Her small face grew solemn, her eyes glassy. She sat for hours staring at the Daruma, unblinking, as if caught in its gaze. When Aiko shook her from the trance, Hana would whisper, "He says I mustn't look away. He says if I blink, he will be gone." The priest returned once more, but when he entered the shop, he grew pale. "It is too strong now," he said. To burn it would be dangerous. It has rooted itself here. Then what can be done? Aiko begged. He lowered his eyes. Sometimes, nothing. Sometimes we must endure until the spirit finds what it wants. But what the spirit wanted remained unclear. Completion, a body, a soul. The dreams spread. Soon the entire village was dreaming of the red-robed monk. He appeared in doorways, in fields, in riverbanks. He said nothing, only stared with his one eye. The other socket, a yawning void. Children awoke screaming. Old men prayed more fervently than ever, and the villagers began to avoid Hirataro's shop, crossing the street rather than pass by. Prosperity crumbled into isolation. The fortune that had blinded Hirataro now seemed a curse. His shelves grew dusty, his coins lay untouched, and still the Daruma sat, its smile a cruel mockery of the suffering around it. Then came the night of the fire. Aiko woke to the crackle of flames. The storeroom had caught alight, though no lamp had been overturned. Smoke curled through the beams, fire licking the shelves. She screamed for her. Together they rushed to save what they could, but as the flames spread, something strange happened. The fire refused to touch the though it all around it blackened and split. The doll remained worse. The flames seemed to bend away from it, as if repelled, as if afraid. And then, from within the hollow shell, came a sound no one could deny. A laugh, low, dry, and rasping. The Daruma did not burn. It watched that the shop was saved, barely, but the village now knew. Word spread that Hirataro harbored a cursed doll, a vessel of a ghost that no fire could consume. Mothers pulled their children indoors when he passed. Neighbors refused to speak to him. The haunting, once contained to his family, now seeped into the village. Crops wilted, chickens stopped laying eggs. At night, villagers heard the sound of something rolling slowly along the paths. Thud, stop, thud, stop, always patient, always closer. The Daruma's blank eye was no longer blank. A shadow had grown there, unmistakable now, a dark circle, half-formed, like an ink blot bleeding outward. It was painting itself, and in the silence of the night, the ghost whispered, louder now, clearer now, complete me. The line between luck and curse had shattered. The doll was no longer a vessel of wishes. It was a vessel of hunger, and it would not remain silent much longer. The wind tore through the cedar trees surrounding the shrine, shrieking like the voices of restless souls. Lanterns flickered as if unseen hands cupped and released their flames, and the shadows danced with grotesque vitality upon the wooden walls. Inside, the villagers huddled, their prayers spilling into the night in broken chants. The Daruma doll sat upon the altar, still round, still unblinking, but the air around it seemed charged alive, aware. It was no longer a painted charm of fortune. It was an anchor of something vast, malignant, and impossibly old. Yuki stood before it, her hands trembling as she clutched her grandmother's prayer beads. Each bead felt heavy, as if bearing the grief of generations. The doll's painted ironly one had been filled, glimmered weightly, as though the ink had not dried despite the years. And in that glint, she saw movement, a shadow not her own, slithering just beneath the lacquered surface. You shouldn't look too deeply, whispered Hannah, the oldest of the shrine maidens, who stood beside Yuki. That's how it pulls you in. The spirit inside thrives on the gaze, on recognition. To be seen is to be believed, and to be believed is to be fed. But Yuki could not look away. Something in that single unblinking eye drew her as a moth is drawn to a flame. Her heartbeat hammered in her ears, echoing like temple drums. The stories of her grandmother returned, tales she once dismissed as superstitions, of monks who crafted the Daruma to trap malignant spirits, of curses sealed in painted bodies, of the warning that no wish should be made lightly. For each desire opened a door, and now the door had opened wide. The room trembled. Tatami mats lifted slightly as if breathing. The timbers groaned like old bones. A voice, faint and broken, echoed through the shrine. It was not a single voice, but many, layered upon one another. Men, women, children, all whispering, all weeping, all bound to the same prison. Yami, help us release, kill me, never free. The voices fractured, collided, and swirled in the air like a storm. The villagers screamed and pressed their hands to their ears, but Yuki heard every word distinctly. She realized the truth. The Daruma did not house one spirit. It was a cage for countless souls, drawn into its painted eye across generations. Every prayer made before it was a chain, binding both the wisher and the wished upon. A gust of cold slammed the doors open. Candles extinguished in unison, leaving only the thin light of the moon. And there, in the shadows, the doll began to move. At first it was subtle, a small tilt forward, a rocking motion. Its round body, designed never to fall, swayed side to side with unnatural intent. Then it lurched, rolling from the altar and thudding onto the floor. Gasps erupted. Yuki's breath caught in her throat. The Daruma rolled toward her. Each bounce of its wooden frame echoed louder than thunder in her ears. She stumbled back, but her legs refused to obey. With each roll, the whispers grew louder, overlapping into screams, and then it stopped right at her feet. The painted eye, wet and glimmering, stared directly into hers. The ink began to spread, bleeding outward like veins, and for an instant Yuki saw what lay inside. A landscape of torment, faceless figures writhing, arms stretching toward her, mouths open in endless screams, and at the center, a figure larger than the rest, something formless, yet with a presence vast enough to blot out the sky. It spoke in silence, its words not carried by sound but by intrusion into her mind. "You wished once, didn't you, child?" Her breath hitched. Yes, she had. Years ago, in secret, she had wished for her mother's illness to end, and it had ended through death. "You gave me a piece of yourself," the voice thundered within her, "and I took a piece of her. A trade, as it has always been. Every wish is a thread, and I weave them all into my web. But you," the darkness shivered with anticipation, "you are different. You hear me, you see me, that makes you mine." The bead chain in her hand grew hot. She cried out, dropping it, and the prayer beads scattered across the floor, each glowing faintly like fallen stars. Hana grabbed Yuki's shoulders, pulling her back, but the doll rolled forward again, knocking into Hana's shins. "Don't touch it," Hana screamed, but it was too late. Hana collapsed, her body writhing as if seized by invisible hands. Her eyes rolled back, and from her throat came a deep guttural voice that was not her own. "Fools, you fed me with every prayer, every desperate hope. You carved my prison, but I turned it into a throne." The villagers screamed and scattered, but the doors slammed shut with an unseen force. No one could leave. The shrine had become a cage, just like the doll. The tatami mats split open, and from the cracks seeped a black mist, coiling like serpents around the room. The mist touched one man's ankle, and his scream pierced the air as his body shriveled, skin tightening against bone. Life sucked from him in an instant. The mist rose upward, feeding back into the Daruma, whose painted eye now glowed with burning crimson light. Yuki realized what was happening. The spirit was not content with whispers and prayers anymore. It was breaking free. The doll had served its purpose, trapping countless souls, until it had grown powerful enough to turn its prison into a doorway. "Yuki," Hana's voice returned briefly, strained beneath the possession. "The eye, don't let it open fully. Once the second eye is filled, it will be whole." Yuki's mind raced. She remembered Daruma dolls are given one painted eye when a wish is made. The second is painted only when the wish is fulfilled. If the spirit within gained both, it would be complete manifest in the world without limits. The doll began to shake violently. Cracks spiderwebbed across its painted face. The crimson glow pulsed brighter with each second. The villagers were dropping to their knees, clutching their heads, their spirits being siphoned, while Yuki stumbled forward, ignoring the searing pain in her temples. She grabbed one of the glowing prayer beads from the floor and pressed it against the doll. The bead hissed, releasing smoke, as though touching molten metal. The whispers grew louder, now shrieking in pain. "Yes, resist, fight me," the voice hissed mockingly. "It will only make me stronger." The doll convulsed, and from its cracks poured out shadowy hands. They reached for Yuki, clutching at her arms, her face, her throat, cold and burning at once. Their grip drained her strength. She gasped, nearly collapsing, but through blurred vision she saw her grandmother's shrine bell lying on the altar. With the last of her strength, she grasped it and rang it. The sound split the air like lightning, pure, piercing, resonant. The shadows recoiled, shrieking, their grip loosening. For a moment, the whispers fell silent, but only for a moment. The doll's cracks widened, and from within, an eye vast, inhuman, glowing like molten gold, not the painted one, but a true eye, staring out from beyond the lacquered shell. And when it blinked, the entire shrine shook, as though struck by an earthquake. The villagers screamed, the floorboards split, the altar collapsed, And Yuki realized with dawning horror this was not merely a spirit, this was a fragment of something far older, something that had existed before shrines, before prayers, before the idea of gods themselves. The doll shattered. From within erupted a torrent of black smoke and screaming faces, filling the shrine like a storm of shadows. The true form began to emerge, limbs twisted and endless, mouths opening across shifting flesh, eyes blinking in and out of existence. It was too vast to comprehend, a being of pure hunger and despair. And yet, it poured from a vessel small enough to fit in her hands. Yuki fell to her knees, the bell slipping from her grip. The sound of it striking the floor rang once, and then was drowned beneath the cacophony of screams. The spirit was free, or so it believed, because in the depths of the smoke, bound to its chaos, the countless souls it had consumed began to writhe differently. They did not scream, they sang, a low, resonant hum that rose like a tide. It was the voices of the trapped, rising against their captor. Yuk. I realized this was her chance. Gathering her breath, she joined the chant, her voice small but steady. Namu, Amida But, Namu, Amida But, the Pure Land prayer, the mantra of release. One by one, the surviving villagers followed, their voices wove together with the spirits inside. The monster shrieked, its many mouths twisting, smoke churned violently, torn apart by the resonance. The crimson glow in the painted eye flickered. The battle was not over. The spirit lunged, its shadowy form collapsing into a single towering figure, stretching toward Yuki with taloned hands, and she braced herself, praying not for her own safety, but for release for all of them. The climax had only just begun. The shrine roared with voices, like 1,000 drums beating beneath the earth. Smoke clawed at the ceiling, blackening the beams until they cracked and splintered. The monstrous form loomed, its limbs bending at angles no human eye should witness, its many mouths shrieking in agony as the chants of the living fused with the cries of the dead it had once consumed. Namu Amida But, Namu Amida But. The prayer swelled, not merely sound but force, each syllable like a blade cutting through the fog. Yuki's voice trembled at first, but grew stronger as she realized what was happening. The spirits inside the Daruma were not powerless. They had been waiting, biding their strength through centuries of imprisonment, and now, with the villagers lending their breath, they rose in rebellion against the thing that had devoured them. The being writhed, flailing as though trying to tear itself apart. Its single golden eye blazed like the sun, but fissures spread across its surface, glowing white-hot, as though it could not contain its own essence. And yet, even in agony, it laughed. A sound rolled through the shrine, deeper than thunder, colder than winter. It was not human laughter, but the vibration of something ancient mocking the feeble resistance of mortals. You think your chants matter? The voice thundered from every shadow, every corner. You think broken souls can resist me? I am older than your prayers, older than your gods. I was bound in clay and paint, but chains only teach hunger. You are children playing with fire, and I am the fire itself. The tatami mats curled and blackened. The floorboards opened to an abyss where roots twisted into skeletal hands, reaching upward. The villagers stumbled, many collapsing into the dark, their screams swallowed instantly. For every voice that vanished, the entity grew stronger, its limbs knitting back together, its golden eye burning brighter. Yuki's heart raced. She had no weapon, no sacred scripture beyond the mantra. Her grandmother's bell lay cracked, useless. The beads had dimmed, their glow exhausted, and yet she did not falter, because in the midst of the chaos, she felt a presence not from outside, but from within her chest. It was warmth, subtle yet undeniable. Her mother's voice. You wished for me, child. You wished in desperation, and it cost me my life. But I was never angry. I was never lost. I am here. Tears blurred Yuki's vision. She had carried that guilt for years, believing she had doomed her mother by painting that eye on the doll. But now, in the crucible of terror, she felt forgiveness radiating through the void. Her mother's spirit was one of many trapped inside, and they were fighting. Yuki, Hannah croaked beside her, half conscious, still trembling from the possession. It's you. It always wanted you. That means you can end it. Hup, Yuki cried, her voice breaking. Hannah's lips twisted into a faint, bloodied smile. By giving it what it wants and then denying it, the monster lunged again, its shadow twisting into a single spear-like limb. Yuki narrowly rolled aside as it struck, splintering the altar into shards. She scrambled across the floor, her hand brushing against the remains of the Daruma doll. It was broken, shattered into lacquered fragments, but the painted eye still pulsed faintly with crimson light. The prison remained, cracked but not destroyed. Yuk. I clutched the largest shard. It was jagged, sharp enough to cut her palm, and the eye stared up at her with grotesque vitality. It wanted completion. It wanted her to paint the second eye, to fulfill the cycle. Her hand shook as the entity loomed overhead, its form stretching wider, filling the shrine with impossible bulk. The golden eye burned into her soul. "Do it," the voice whispered, slithering into her thoughts. "Finish what you began. Give me wholeness, and I will give you power. I will return your mother. I will restore everything you lost. All it takes is one stroke." For a heartbeat, Yuki faltered. The temptation was unbearable. To see her mother alive again, to erase the years of loneliness, the guilt. It was everything she had ever dreamed of. Her hand hovered over the shard, trembling, aching to obey. Then, through the roar of the monster, she heard it, the chorus of spirits, the low hum of their defiance, and within it, her mother's voice, again gentle, resolute. "You must not bind yourself to it, Yuki. Life cannot be undone, but the cycle can be broken." Her tears fell onto the shard, washing against the painted eye, and in that moment, she understood. She lifted the shard high. Instead of painting the second eye, she drove it into her chest. Pain exploded through her body, but it was not death, it was release. Her soul poured outward, fusing with the shard, surging into the fractured prison. For a blinding instant, she was everywhere inside the eye, inside the smoke, inside the countless spirits. She saw them all. Mothers, fathers, children, monks, wanderers, all trapped, all yearning. And with her sacrifice, the prison inverted. The painted eye imploded, pulling the golden gaze into itself. The monster screamed, its limbs writhing as they were sucked back into the lacquered fragments. The smoke coiled violently, dragged inward by a vortex of impossible gravity. The shrine shook as if torn between worlds. The villagers clutched one another, shielding their faces from the gale. Some were pulled toward the vortex, their bodies vanishing into the fragments. But their screams were not of terror, they were of relief. Yuki's body glowed with white fire as her spirit anchored the ritual. Her voice rose above the storm. "Namu Amida Butsu." The vortex shrieked, devouring everything unnatural. Shadows clawed at the floorboards, faces screamed and vanished, and finally, with a crack like the splitting of the sky, the shrine fell silent. The Daruma shard lay on the floor, inert. The eye was gone. The crimson light extinguished. Yuki's body collapsed, lifeless, her face peaceful. The villagers wept. Hana crawled to her side, clutching her hand. She did it. She gave herself to end it. But as the survivors staggered from the ruined shrine, none could shake the weight pressing upon their hearts. For though the doll was gone, the silence was unnatural, too deep, too perfect. And then, as the moonlight pierced through the broken roof, something glimmered. On the far wall, where shadows still lingered, a faint outline appeared. A painted eye, not on a doll, but directly on the wooden beam. It blinked once, slowly, as though testing the world. Hana froze, her blood running cold. The curse was not destroyed, it had only shifted, its prison altered. Yuki's sacrifice had sealed it for now, but the spirit's laughter still echoed faintly, curling through the silence like smoke. Every wish leaves a door, and doors can always open again. The villagers fled, leaving the ruins behind. Generations later, they would speak of the night the Daruma broke, the night Yuki sacrificed herself to save them. Some would whisper that the doll was gone forever. Others would say it still waits, hidden in the ruins, its single painted eye watching. And those who came too close to the abandoned shrine claimed they heard a girl's voice in the wind, gentle and sorrowful, repeating the same prayer over and over. Namu, Amida But, Namu, Amida But. But beneath it, softer still, another voice lingered, a laugh, patient and cruel. The story would spread across villages, then cities, then the world, of a cursed doll that could grant wishes at the cost of souls, of a girl who defied it, and of a spirit that could never truly be destroyed. And in the shadows of forgotten temples, in the corners of homes where Daruma dolls sat collecting dust, painted eyes seemed to glint just a little too brightly in the dark. The ending was not an end, but a pause. The ghost was still there, trapped yet waiting, watching through painted eyes. Waiting for the next wish.